the 8-1 decision that shook the Second Amendment. It started with a single order just a few pages from the Supreme Court, but its impact is echoing across every state line. An 8-1 emergency decision has just reshaped the entire fight to preserve the Second Amendment, and the balance between state power and federal authority may never be the same again. This isn't politics. This is the future of how your rights are protected, challenged, and interpreted all in one sweeping move from the nation's highest court. And tonight, we're breaking down what this decision truly means for gun owners, lawmakers, and every American who still believes the Constitution matters. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to Firearms Law Advisor and hit the like button, because the legal battles are getting bigger, faster, and more unpredictable. And if you value your rights, you'll want to stay informed. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Missouri Law that Sparked a National Showdown. It all started in 2021 when Missouri lawmakers passed one of the boldest pieces of gun legislation in modern American history. The Second Amendment Preservation Act, or SAPA, wasn't just another symbolic state bill. It was a direct declaration that Missouri would no longer participate in enforcing federal gun control laws it believed violated the Constitution. The law declared that federal gun laws infringing on the Second Amendment were invalid within Missouri. It prohibited state and local law enforcement from cooperating with federal agents enforcing those laws. It allowed private citizens to sue officials who helped carry out federal gun restrictions. It was built on the principle of state sovereignty, testing whether states could refuse to enforce unconstitutional federal mandates. SAPA immediately drew national attention and controversy. Supporters hailed it as a model of state resistance against Washington's overreach, while critics warned it would cripple law enforcement and violate the Supremacy Clause. The battle lines were drawn, and what began as a state law was about to turn into a Supreme Court fight over the limits of federal power. Chapter 2. The DOJ's Swift Response. Within weeks of SAPA's passage, the U.S. Department of Justice moved to strike it down. The Biden administration called Missouri's law an open challenge to federal authority, one that threatened to upend the relationship between state and federal law enforcement nationwide. The Department of Justice filed suit against Missouri, claiming SAPA violated the Constitution's Supremacy Clause. Federal prosecutors argued that the state could not decide which federal laws were valid and which were not. They warned that SAPA made it harder for federal agencies to combat violent crime and illegal gun trafficking. Missouri countered that it was simply refusing to spend state resources on enforcing unconstitutional federal gun laws. This case was more than a disagreement over legal theory. It was a collision between two competing visions of America. The federal government insisted on uniform control, while Missouri stood by the belief that states have a duty to protect citizens from unconstitutional laws. That clash would ignite one of the most significant Second Amendment battles of the decade. Chapter 3. The lower court's crushing decision. When the case reached the U.S. District Court, the decision was swift and severe. The judge ruled that Missouri's SAPA law was unconstitutional and issued a statewide injunction blocking it from taking effect. In a single ruling, the nation's strongest pro-gun law was silenced. The court found SAPA directly conflicted with the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. It declared that no state could nullify or invalidate federal law within its borders. The injunction was sweeping, halting every part of the Missouri statute from being enforced. Missouri officials immediately appealed, arguing that the court had stripped states of their sovereign right to protect constitutional freedoms. For gun owners and state legislators across the country, the ruling felt like a gut punch. Missouri's bold experiment had been crushed before it truly began. But the state wasn't finished. Determined to defend its law and principles, Missouri prepared to take the fight to the next level in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Chapter 4. The 8th Circuit's unanimous blow. At the appellate level, hopes were high that a panel of federal judges might see the issue differently. Missouri argued that the state's refusal to enforce certain federal laws did not interfere with federal authority. Instead, it was exercising its constitutional right to decide how state resources were used, but the 8th Circuit didn't see it that way. The three-judge panel ruled unanimously that Missouri's SAPA law was unconstitutional. They said the law purports to invalidate federal statutes and therefore violates the Supremacy Clause. The court stated that local police could not pick and choose which federal laws to follow. This decision affirmed the lower court's injunction, keeping SAPA completely frozen. The ruling was a major setback not only for Missouri but for other states considering similar laws. Yet even after this second defeat, Missouri refused to retreat. State leaders turned to the Supreme Court. asking the justices to step in and decide whether a state can legally refuse to assist in enforcing federal gun control. Chapter 5. The Supreme Court's 8-1 emergency decision. When the case reached the Supreme Court, it was clear the stakes had never been higher. The state asked the justices for an emergency order to reinstate SAPA, while the broader legal fight continued. The answer came quickly, and with it, a decision that would send shockwaves through the Second Amendment community. The Supreme Court issued an 8-1 ruling denying Missouri's emergency request. Justice Clarence Thomas was the only member of the court who voted in favor of Missouri's position. The decision meant the lower court's injunction would remain in effect while the case moved forward. The justices gave no full opinion but signaled they were not yet ready to intervene in the ongoing litigation. While some saw this as a defeat, others recognized it as a procedural move, not a final judgment on the Second Amendment itself. The fight was far from over. Missouri's case was still alive in the lower courts, and the Supreme Court's silence left open the possibility that the justices might revisit the issue once a final decision was reached. Chapter 6. The Trump administration's unexpected move. When the administration changed hands, many expected the new leadership to defend Missouri's SAPA law with full force. After all, the Trump administration had positioned itself as a strong ally of the Second Amendment. But what happened next took both supporters and critics by surprise. The Trump Department of Justice chose not to fully defend the SAPA law in its Supreme Court filings. Instead, it agreed that the previous injunction may have been too broad, but still supported parts of the lower court's reasoning. The DOJ stated that once the case returned to the district court, it would release some of the prior judgments won under the Biden administration. This partial reversal left both Missouri and the gun rights community confused and divided over the government's real stance. For many Second Amendment supporters, the move was disappointing. It showed how even a pro-gun administration could hesitate when constitutional questions about federal power were at stake. While Missouri continued to fight, it now had to do so without the full backing it once expected from Washington. Chapter 7. What the 8-1 decision really means. At first glance, the Supreme Court's 8-1 decision looked like a defeat. But for those who understand how the court operates, this was not the end. It was a strategic pause. The justices were not ruling against Missouri's position. They were simply declining to intervene at this stage of the case. The decision was procedural, meaning it did not determine whether SAPA was constitutional. Justice Thomas's lone vote in favor of Missouri signaled that at least one member of the court sees merit in revisiting federal overreach. The denial keeps the case alive, allowing more evidence and arguments to develop in the lower courts. It shows the court's cautious approach when dealing with issues that test the balance between state rights and federal supremacy. So, while headlines portrayed Missouri's effort as a loss, the reality is far more nuanced. The justices essentially said, "Not yet." The real showdown could still come later, once the case returns to the Supreme Court on a complete record. For now, the question of whether a state can shield its citizens from unconstitutional federal gun laws remains open and alive. Chapter 8. The ripple effect across America. The impact of the Missouri case didn't end at its borders. As soon as the Supreme Court's decision was released, lawmakers, sheriffs, and attorneys general across the country began to reevaluate their own positions on federal gun enforcement. The message from Washington was clear, but it didn't stop the movement. It redirected it. States like Wyoming, Texas, and Oklahoma began exploring revisions to their own SAPA-style bills. Many shifted from nullification to the anti-commandeering model, focusing on refusing state cooperation rather than declaring federal law invalid. Gun rights groups began educating legislators on crafting laws that could survive constitutional scrutiny. Federal agencies, on the other hand, took the ruling as a green light to challenge or monitor similar state initiatives. The Missouri fight became a blueprint, not for failure, but for strategy. Every state watching learned where the legal lines are drawn and how to adjust their approach. The movement to preserve the Second Amendment through state action didn't end. It evolved into something more focused, smarter, and harder to challenge in court. Chapter 9. The road ahead for Missouri. With the Supreme Court stepping back, the battle now shifts back to the lower courts, where the details of enforcement, jurisdiction, and constitutional limits will be tested again. Missouri's attorneys have already signaled they plan to revise and defend the law's framework while preparing for the next phase of appeals. The case returns to the district court, where the government must now decide how much of the injunction will remain. Missouri may introduce a narrower version of SAPA that focuses purely on anti-commandeering principles. The Trump DOJ's promise to release portions of the earlier judgment will shape how both sides argue going forward. Depending on those outcomes, the case could make its way back to the Eighth Circuit and eventually to the Supreme Court once more. In practical terms, Missouri is rewriting history in real time. Every motion, every argument, and every revision of SAPA will become part of a legal roadmap for other states seeking to do the same. What began as a simple state law has now grown into a test case for the future of American federalism and the protection of gun rights under the Constitution. Chapter 10. What gun owners need to understand now. For every responsible gun owner, this decision carries lessons that go far beyond Missouri. The courts have made one thing clear: the Second Amendment's future will not be protected by politics alone. It will depend on who understands the law, defends it, and stands ready to challenge overreach when it appears. Federal law still governs firearm regulation until new rulings redefine the balance of power. State governments can resist enforcement, but cannot declare federal law invalid on their own. Future SAPA bills will likely focus on limiting cooperation rather than canceling federal authority. The real protection for gun rights now lies in continued vigilance, advocacy, and staying informed as new cases emerge. This is the moment for gun owners to stay engaged and aware. The legal fight is shifting not away from the Second Amendment, but deeper into the courts that interpret it. Understanding how these cases unfold is the key to knowing how your rights are defended or eroded, one ruling at a time. The battle for preservation continues. The Supreme Court's 8-1 decision may have paused Missouri's fight, but it didn't end it. In fact, it may have sparked a larger movement, one that could redefine how the Second Amendment is preserved in the modern era. Every decision from this point forward will shape how states defend their sovereignty and how Americans protect their freedoms. If you believe in staying informed and standing for your rights, make sure to subscribe to Firearms Law Advisor and turn on notifications. Share this video so more gun owners understand the legal battles shaping their future. Because at the end of the day, this nation was built by armed scholars and it will be maintained by them.